a theater in Philadelphia called the Trocadero, and he did something in that stand-up set that he'd been doing on and off in his stand-up routine for a long while, but for some reason, when he said it that specific night, 3 years ago in October 2014, for some reason, when he said it that night, it set something off. That's a clip from a comedy set from Hannibal Buress 3 years ago this week in Philadelphia. And that joke that he's making there at the end about all the online search results you will find, more than even you'll get from Googling Hannibal Buress' name. All those online search results you'll get if you Google Bill Cosby and rape. He was right about that. There were lots of allegations about Bill Cosby circulating more or less informally for years. And you can Google that stuff. I mean, so much so at the time that Buress had been regularly referencing those allegations about Bill Cosby in his stand-up act. And it was sort of just obscure enough that some of the laughter would be incredulous and, wow, that's a crazy thing to say. But some of it would be people recognizing it and thinking, oh, yeah, I have heard that, right? He'd been doing it for a while, but for some reason, when he did it that specific night, October 16th, 2014 in Philly, it took off. That clip of that portion of his show got picked up by Philadelphia Magazine. Dan McQuaid wrote it up for Philadelphia Magazine. You see the subhead on this story here. Comedian Hannibal Buress called Bill Cosby a rapist in a bit at the Trocadero on Thursday night. Cosby has been accused of sexual assault by multiple women. So it got picked up from that comedy routine by Philadelphia Magazine. Then that got picked up by multiple other news reports. It became quickly a sustained topic of national conversation. And within just a few weeks, a woman who had previously made a serious sexual assault allegation against Bill Cosby, she wrote about what she says was her experience in the Washington Post. Then Bill Cosby himself got asked about it in an interview in NPR. Then the day after the NPR interview, another woman came forward to make another, turns out to be very similar allegation against Bill Cosby. Then the day after that, another woman came forward with a similar allegation. Then the day after that, yet another woman came forward with a very similar allegation. This time, it was a famous model, very well-known, Janice Dickinson. And at that point, Bill Cosby's shows, the syndicated reruns, but also his comedy shows, started getting pulled off TV, started getting pulled off Netflix. Then, interestingly, news organizations started to come out with their own accounts of Cosby over the years, or people who worked for him over the years, trying to stop news organizations or stop reporters from even asking about these allegations, let alone from reporting on them in detail. By the end of that next month, by the end of November 2014, 9 more women had come forward, all with remarkably similar allegations about their experiences with Bill Cosby. And these allegations dated back for decades. I mean, some of them were, you know, in the 2000s, but some of them dated all the way back to the 1960s. And in terms of the women who were making these allegations, it was women who had met him all over the country. It was women who had met him in all sorts of different circumstances, professional and otherwise. But the allegations that they made about him were remarkably consistent in their descriptions. They alleged that they were drugged and then that they were assaulted. Ultimately, more than 50 women came forward to accuse Bill Cosby of rape or sexual assault or other kinds of sexual misconduct. Those allegations really had been around for decades, though. The Today Show and People magazine had both reported on a few of the allegations over the years. A civil lawsuit had been fired against Bill Cosby by one of his accusers more than a decade ago. But despite all that hiding in plain sight public record, despite the fact that there, for a very long time, had been at least a few women who were willing to speak about what they said happened to them, despite those very Googleable rumors and allegations, it took until the fall of 2014, for some reason, for it to catch, for that story to blow open, which ultimately resulted in more than 50 women coming forward. And then in the following year, December 2015, Bill Cosby was charged in conjunction with one of his alleged victims' allegations. He was charged with aggravated indecent assault. In June, Bill Cosby went on trial, and the result was a hung jury. The jury was deadlocked. Bill Cosby may or may not face a retrial on the same charges again this upcoming spring. Cosby is now 80 years old. He's reportedly getting new lawyers in time for that new trial. In July of last year, a former anchor at the Fox News channel named Gretchen Carlson filed a lawsuit alleging sexual harassment by the Fox News founding chairman, Roger Ailes. Among other things, Gretchen Carlson's suit alleged that the reason her career ended at Fox is because she refused sexual advances from Ailes. Within days of Gretchen Carlson's lawsuit, New York Magazine named 2 more women and reported anonymous allegations from 4 other women, all of whom also claimed sexual harassment by Roger Ailes at Fox. Fox then started an internal review of the allegations. They never made a public account of what the findings were from that internal review, but whatever they found led to Roger Ailes leaving that company. But they also gave him $40 million on his way out the door. Soon thereafter, they paid out another $20 million to Gretchen Carlson to settle her harassment allegations that she had made against Ailes. But even beyond those very large payouts, this turns out to have been a very expensive time at Fox. We later learned that just as Roger Ailes was being forced out and paid that $40 million on his way out the door, Fox was also, very soon thereafter, secretly paying out another sexual harassment settlement against their other most high-profile employee, the former 8 p.m. Fox News host, who's named Bill O'Reilly. And that secret payout to settle a sexual harassment allegation against him, that was followed by another former Fox News host filing another sexual harassment lawsuit against O'Reilly and Fox. And then the New York Times broke the news that Fox had paid well over $10 million in more than half a dozen sexual harassment settlements to women who had made accusations against Bill O'Reilly over the course of a decade and a half. And by April of this year, Mr. O'Reilly was gone. And as remarkable as it has been to see the collapse, the public collapse of these previously untouchable, almost unimaginably powerful men in American politics and media and culture, honestly, it will not make sense to historians who try to look back on this remarkable time in American culture and politics and the collapse of all of these icons, while at the same time, those historians will find themselves having to refer to this time period in our country as the Trump era. A year ago this week, which was 1 month before the presidential election, and one of the things we've talked about in the last few days is how the day that tape came out, a year ago this week, that day was one of the most insane news days in the entire election cycle. It was one of the most insane news days in American politics in a long time. All in the same day. That was Hurricane Matthew hitting Florida. That was the federal government announcing that Russia was trying to interfere in our presidential election. Then it was that Access Hollywood tape coming out with the presidential candidate of the Republican Party bragging about groping women without their consent and getting away with it. And that was followed immediately, within the hour, by WikiLeaks starting to dump the personal emails of the Clinton campaign chairman, John Podesta, his emails which had been hacked by Russian intelligence. That all happened on the same day. That all happened before dinner time. And in the days that followed the Access Hollywood tape, more than a dozen women came forward to make allegations that Donald Trump, in fact, had done to them in real life what he was bragging about on that bus. Everything from forcibly pinning women down and kissing them without their consent to sexually groping women without their consent, just as he had described on the bus. And at one point, candidate Trump said he would sue all those women who were making all of those allegations. He never did. He also disparaged some of the women who were making those allegations as essentially too unattractive to be worth him assaulting them. But then, of course, he got elected president. On Friday of last week, to mark the anniversary of that Access Hollywood tape becoming public, the feminist group Ultraviolet played that tape on a loop on the National Mall for 12 straight hours. They just aired it on a loop from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. just so as a country we'd get a tangible reminder that the man serving as commander-in-chief, the man sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office, is that same guy who bragged on tape about being able to get away with sexually assaulting and groping women whenever he wanted to because he's a star. It's the Trump era. And President Trump, like Bill O'Reilly, like Roger Ailes before he died, like Bill Cosby, all of them denied these allegations against them. But this is the era that we are living in. And now it's Hollywood. On Thursday, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey at the New York Times reported out decades of sexual assault and serious sexual harassment allegations against Hollywood mega producer Harvey Weinstein. We're going to be speaking with New York Times reporter Jodi Kantor about breaking that story. She's going to be here tomorrow night to talk about that New York Times reporting here on this show. I'm very happy about that. But by now, you've heard the basics of what Twohey and Kantor reported out at the New York Times. Nearly 30 years of allegations. At least 8 women named in the story, including famous actors like Ashley Judd and Rose McGowan. And again, what these interviews showed from all of these different women over a long period of time is a strikingly consistent pattern of alleged behavior. Harvey Weinstein allegedly isolating young women, getting them alone, women who were in a position of either directly working for him or being professionally dependent on him as a Hollywood producer. And then the alleged behavior is just textbook sexual harassment up to and including serious sexual assault. He's repeatedly described as taking off his clothes, exposing himself, demanding sex, demanding sexual contact of various kinds, refusing to take no for an answer, and then allegedly retaliating against young women who managed to escape him, managed to rebuff what he was trying to do. And what the Times broke on Thursday is these stories about what these 8 women allegedly say happened to them when Harvey Weinstein got them alone. But it's also the story of Harvey Weinstein not alone. It's Harvey Weinstein himself and the Weinstein Company trying to keep the lid on all of these allegations, including at least 8 reported cash settlements paid out to women who made claims against Harvey Weinstein. But as in so many other instances like this is also the story of an open secret, of this alleged behavior being something that was widely known and widely discussed in the industry. And those of us who are outside the industry wouldn't necessarily have been privy to those rumors, but you know what? Because it's the show business industry, we can actually see evidence of that. We can see evidence of how widely this was understood and talked about and tacitly accepted in the fact that Harvey Weinstein's behavior toward actresses and toward young women was joked about repeatedly, openly, like on TV shows and when they were announcing the Oscar nominations. But it's a joke, right? And the reason the joke worked was because everybody knew what that was about, right? The premise of the joke there was widely held enough that that was considered to be funny, right? At an industry event for the Oscars and on TV in general for a national audience. What was well known enough to be a joke that would land, as recently as like this time last week, has now, because of this reporting, exploded. So that now, actually, for the first time in decades, it has costs for Harvey Weinstein, who has been fired from the company that bears his name, the company that will likely no longer bear his name. The Times followed up their initial reporting today with absolutely harrowing, further similar allegations from actresses including Gwyneth Paltrow and Angelina Jolie, and a number of women who left the industry, in part because of what they say happened to them when they were caught alone with Harvey Weinstein. But now today, Ronan Farrow, writing for the New Yorker magazine, has published his own account of Harvey Weinstein's alleged behavior. And what Ronan Farrow has written for the New Yorker pushes the story even further and makes the open secret nature of this alleged behavior all the more unfathomable. From Ronan Farrow's story today, quote, "I was told by 13 women that between the 1990s and 2015, Harvey Weinstein sexually harassed or assaulted them, allegations that corroborate and overlap with the revelations in the New York Times and also include far more serious claims. 3 women told me that Weinstein raped them, allegations that include Weinstein forcibly performing or receiving oral sex and forcing vaginal sex. Quote, 4 actresses, including Mira Sorvino and Rosanna Arquette, told me they suspected that after they rejected Harvey Weinstein's advances or complained about them to company representatives, Weinstein had them removed from projects or dissuaded people from hiring them." And again, this may be, at this point, the most unfathomable, or at least most jaw-dropping part of it. quote, 16 former and current executives and assistants at Weinstein's companies told me that they witnessed or had knowledge of unwanted sexual advances and touching at events associated with Weinstein's films and in the workplace. All 16 said that the behavior was widely known within both Miramax and the Weinstein Company. 16 people who worked there or witnessed it, or say they knew about it. And they knew that everybody else knew about it too. Now, I should tell you that Harvey Weinstein, his representatives put out a statement in response to the New Yorker reporting. I'll read the statement. Any allegations of non-consensual sex are unequivocally denied by Mr. Weinstein. Mr. Weinstein has further confirmed that there were never any acts of retaliation against any women for refusing his advances. Mr. Weinstein obviously can't speak to anonymous allegations, but with respect to any women who've made allegations on the record, Mr. Weinstein believes that all of these relationships were consensual. Mr. Weinstein has begun counseling, has listened to the community, and is pursuing a better path. Mr. Weinstein is hoping that if he makes enough progress, he will be given a second chance. That's the response that Weinstein and his representatives have made to this new reporting. But what Ronan Farrow, in his piece for The New Yorker, what he further adds to this story is tape. He has published the audio tape of a woman, frankly, I mean, to a lay observer, it's a woman actively being sexually harassed and pestered by Harvey Weinstein. A tape in which he admits that the previous day he had grabbed her breast against her will. He explained to her by way of excusing that behavior, quote, "I'm used to it." That tape was apparently made by the NYPD as they investigated sexual assault claims by one woman who says she got out of Harvey Weinstein's clutches and then went to the nearest police precinct to tell them that she had been assaulted by Weinstein. So we'll have that tape for you in just a minute if you haven't heard it. But on top of us coming to terms with the fact that these allegations were so widely known and apparently accepted, and as in so many of these cases, coming to terms with the fact that a large corporate conspiracy was involved in covering this all up, in this case, with Harvey Weinstein, there's now, as of today, also the question of why this was never, ever prosecuted anywhere. In any of the decades these allegations were made or talked about, and in at least one instance were reported directly to the police. Ronan Farrow joins us next. Stay with us.
I'm feeling very uncomfortable right now.
Please come in now. And 1 minute, and if you want to leave when the guy comes with my jacket,
Yesterday you touched my breast.
Oh, please, I'm sorry. Just come on. I'm used to that. Come on.
Are you used to that?
Yes, come in. Because
No, but I'm not used to that.
I won't do it again. Come on. Sit here. Sit here for a minute, please.
No, I don't want to.
If you do this now, you will embarrass me. No. Never call me again. Okay? I'm sorry. I promise you I won't do anything.
I know, but yesterday was too
The
much.
guy's coming. I will never do another thing to you. 5 minutes. Don't ruin your friendship with me for 5 minutes.
It's a recording of Hollywood mega producer Harvey Weinstein that was secretly captured during a New York Police Department sting. That audio was obtained by Ronan Farrow, who's written a frankly harrowing account of the harassment and assault and rape allegations against Harvey Weinstein for the New Yorker magazine. This follows reporting last week, the end of last week, from the New York Times. Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey breaking that story open, and now Ronan Farrow pushing it into Nuclear Farrow today. Ronan is a contributing correspondent with NBC News, and he joins us live in studio tonight. Ronan, it's nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here. I'm glad you're covering this, Rachel.
Thank you for saying so. I have a lot I want to talk to you about this, but let me start with that tape. Can you tell us the circumstances under which that tape was recorded and why it was recorded?
There was a young woman, Ambra Badalena Gutierrez, an Italian-Filipina model, who, in a pattern that has shown up again and again in woman after woman's story, was spotted by Mr. Weinstein at an event, and subsequently he reached out to set up a meeting, and when that meeting transpired at his office, she said he groped her, he grabbed her breasts, and that is a potential misdemeanor that could carry up to 3 months in jail. That's a serious act. After the incident, as you alluded to, she went straight to the police, to the nearest precinct. We talked to a lot of sources close to this investigation who found her extremely credible. She went in an act that everyone associated with this investigation said made her frightened, but she thought it could expose and stop something important. She recorded this with the police. There was a wire operation.
So she went in and reported that he had, this allegation that she made that he had groped her, and in response they said, will you wear a wire, and go back and have further contact with him.
Already he was contacting her again and again, and that is another consistent pattern in these incidents. He is very aggressive in following up with these women, according to source after source. And in this case, he called her while she was with the police, and they used that as an opportunity to set up this sting.
Okay, so she goes back and she has contact with him, and in the excerpt, it's a longer tape. You've heard even more of it than what we just played.
That's right.
And more than what you published. But in that piece that we just played there, he is obviously being very persistent in terms of trying to get her to go into his room with him. She asks him about the previous incident, and he appears to admit to it.
He says, I'm used to that. Which, for you or I might be a bit response to that kind of inquiry. She's like saying, why did you touch my breasts?
Yeah.
And, look, he has issued denials of this publicly. And this was a recording that, sources close to this investigation said he understood had been destroyed. But people involved in this investigation were angry about the fact that this was suppressed, and that recording did survive.
So in some of the other cases of high-profile men who's been accused of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape, one of the main things that comes up once the torrent of accusers start coming forward is statute of limitations. In this specific case, we're talking 1 day after the alleged assault from when this recording was made. The New York Police Department and the Manhattan DA's office both put out statements today essentially saying it wasn't our fault that this didn't get prosecuted. What's your assessment of why this didn't get prosecuted?
Look, the sources quoted in this story said, and we quote a source close to this investigation who said, this made me as angry as anything in my career, and I've been on the force for a long time. These were people telling us they had the evidence.
So, Ronan, in terms of your reporting on this, I don't want you to tell me anything that I don't want to ask you for sources you don't want to talk about.
A story like this, there's a lot in there that's very sensitive, but also it's expansive how many people put their names on this too. And there's a lot we can talk about. Thanks to the bravery of these women.
I had heard that there was a race between the New Yorker and the New York Times in terms of getting this story. That obviously this was a long chase for you. You were working at NBC News when you started working on this. You ended up publishing it with the New Yorker. If you can speak to that, I'd love to hear about that. Also, we know that Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey were working for this along with their reporting team at the New York Times. One question I have about this is, why now? Because these allegations go back more than 20 years, why are people willing to talk now? Why were women willing to talk to you about these allegations? They hadn't previously done so.
So, I'll speak to that last point first.
Okay.
Of these 16 executives and assistants who talked to me, over and over again, I heard from them, we feel a profound sense of guilt about what we saw and are silent about it for years.
People inside the company who knew about it, who'd heard about it, who'd witnessed it.
A female employee who said she was asked to serve as, she used the term, a honeypot in meetings, meaning she would be present to reassure some of these young women who were being brought in that this was professional, and then would be asked to leave the hotel room or other room. And look, I talked to multiple employees who said we saw fear in these women's eyes. And that is something that haunted a lot of these people. None of them quit as a result. I think that haunted them too. And, even still to this day, some of them spoke only anonymously. So this is a tough issue.
What happens, though, when you've been haunted by something for 10, 12, 15, 17, 20 years, and then all of a sudden the haunting becomes too much and you all decide to talk? I mean...
They also spoke to a changing culture that after the revelations about Ailes and Cosby and these powerful men, they felt that the grip on power of these individuals is slipping, and they felt that there was an atmosphere in which they could finally speak. Now, look, that's not all noble. They also said Harvey Weinstein specifically is less powerful now. We fear retaliation less because he is no longer, in the words of one source, the 4th most powerful person in Hollywood. He is now the, 200th most powerful person.
That's fascinating.
So there was a pragmatic change here, too, and you see it again and again with these other men, too. These stories come out when they are less powerful.
Ronan, I have a couple more questions for you about this. I was not supposed to keep you for a second segment, but I'm overruling anybody. Do you mind staying?
I would be honored.
We'll be right back with Ronan Farrow because I have something important to ask him about this. We'll be right back. Joining us once again is Ronan Farrow. He's a contributor for The New Yorker magazine who broke this explosive story today about further revelations concerning Hollywood mega producer Harvey Weinstein. Again, the allegations against Harvey Weinstein first broken wide open late last week by the New York Times, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey. Ronan Farrow is reporting today at The New Yorker, adds very serious allegations to what have been first reported by The New York Times, including several allegations of rape. But Mr. Weinstein, he of course is denying the charges. Ronan, thanks for sticking with us.
Good to be here.
I had a couple just follow-up questions for you on this. In part, I wanted to ask you because of your own family background, because of your own history. I feel like you have some unique insight into kind of the show business part of this. And that's part of it that I have to say I don't understand at all. You were just talking about the fact that maybe one of the reasons this came out now, that people were willing to basically go public with what they've long known about Harvey Weinstein, is that he's not as powerful in the business as he used to be. How important is that to understanding what's going to happen next in Hollywood? I mean, this is a Hollywood disgrace. If this was a huge open secret for decades and everybody tacitly allowed it and excused it, what do you think is going to happen within the industry?
You know, I actually don't think that this is a Hollywood phenomenon. You know, I don't think this is about Harvey Weinstein ultimately. I don't think this is about the film industry ultimately. The abuse of power is a phenomenon we see over and over again in industry after industry. This is about a culture of silence around powerful men. It is about a machine described to me by source after source in this story designed to silence accusations like this. I'm talking about powerful PR teams designed to smear people publicly. I'm talking about a legal team that uses aggressive non-disclosure agreements and settlements, which you talked about in your A block. This is a fusillade of attacks that women face when they speak out, and that's why this is so brave what they've done here.
Did your sources, the women who spoke to you, run up against that specifically in your reporting for this story, and did you run up against that in reporting this story?
These sources absolutely ran up against that.
The women who made these allegations faced that while you were reporting on it?
Yes, indeed, and there is a woman quoted in this story who went on camera, on the record, and I described what she said to me, which was the legal angle is coming after me, and she withdrew from the piece, and her story is not in there, but that is a woman with serious allegation.
So this is, just to be clear, this is a woman who told you, detailed her allegation about Weinstein to you, was going to be on the record, and withdrew her permission
on camera on the record in January, and withdrew.
Because she says the legal angle is coming after me. Does that mean the Weinstein companies? Does that mean Weinstein personally?
I will tell you that source after source said they were receiving harassing calls. Some of those are also discussed in this story. These women were afraid, and based on my reporting, legitimately afraid.
Afraid of Weinstein personally, or afraid of other people in his company, afraid of people hired by the company?
Both. On a personal level, they talk about the physical fear born partly of trauma, you know, after an incident like these alleged rapes. You know, the actress Asia Argento, who told a very difficult story of rape, said she forevermore was in his thrall, in a sense, that he had this power to make her feel weak and small. And then also, yes, fear of the machine, fear for their careers and their livelihoods. These are women who at times were very enmeshed with Mr. Weinstein and his business.
Including, and not just threats and fear at the time that it happened in terms of the intimidation, but threats now while they're coming out.
Ongoing, and I talk in the story about sources receiving multiple calls from him, trying to determine who talked to me, when they talked to me, trying to shut them up.
So Ronan, you just said that one of these women spoke on camera back in January. Why did you end up reporting this story for The New Yorker and not for NBC News?
Look, you would have to ask NBC and NBC executives about the details of that story. I'm not going to comment on any news organization's story that they, you know, did or didn't run. I will say that over many years, many news organizations have circled this story and faced a great deal of pressure in doing so. And there are now reports emerging publicly about the kinds of pressure that news organizations face in this. And that is real. In the course of this reporting, I was threatened with a lawsuit personally by Mr. Weinstein. And, you know, we've already seen that the Times has been publicly threatened with a suit. I don't want to describe any suits leveled at other organizations that I work with, but you know, certainly this is a considerable amount of pressure that outlets get us.
And NBC says that, you know, you didn't, that the story wasn't publishable, that it wasn't ready to go by the time that you brought it to them. But obviously it's ready to go by the time you got it into The New Yorker.
I walked into the door at the New Yorker with an explosively reportable piece that should have been public earlier, and immediately, obviously, the New Yorker recognized that, and it is not accurate to say that it was not reportable. In fact, there were multiple determinations that it was reportable at NBC.
Ronan Farrow, contributor to The New Yorker, who broke the story, also a contributing correspondent to NBC News. I know parts of the story in terms of the reporting side of it is not the easiest stuff to talk about, and I know you don't want to make yourself the center of this story.
A small note, that is important. Look, these women came forward with incredibly brave allegations. They tore their guts out talking about this and re-traumatized themselves because they believed they could protect other women going forward. So this should not be a story about me or the wonderful work that Jodi Kantor did, important work, but ultimately we are there in service of women doing something really tough, and I hope people hear their voices and focus on that.
Ronan Farrow, thank you, my friends. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.
Great to see you.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Tonight we have some late-breaking developments to report regarding the congressional investigation into the Russia attack on our election last year, and specifically on the Trump-Russia dossier. The top-line news tonight is that the firm that commissioned the dossier, Fusion GPS, has been subpoenaed. That's the top-line news. The really interesting news, though, is who they got the subpoena from. Congressman Devin Nunes chairs the House Intelligence Committee. You might remember that he supposedly stepped down from his role overseeing that committee's Russia investigation several months ago. But now, he, personally, alone, has issued subpoenas in the investigation to Fusion GPS. This news was first reported by CNN tonight. It was subsequently confirmed by NBC News. But although this wasn't totally clear in those initial reports, we can confirm that these subpoenas seeking documents and testimony from Fusion GPS, these subpoenas were issued unilaterally by Devin Nunes himself, with nobody else's signature on them, and without any even notification to any Democrats on the committee that the subpoenas were going out. Now, that's weird. Congressman Nunes, of course, was a member of the Trump transition team. He was an early Trump supporter. He was forced to step aside from his role supposedly leading the Russia investigation when he came under pressure in April. He came under pressure in April because he paid that weird secret nighttime visit to the White House and then repeated these false claims that the president had been secretly wiretapped at Trump Tower by the Obama administration. Devin Nunes stepped aside after the House Ethics Committee launched an investigation into whether or not he disclosed classified information when he was pulling off that weird White House stunt. Devin Nunes, though, while he says he stepped aside from the investigation, appears to have defined stepping aside in a way that doesn't necessarily resonate with anybody else's understanding of that definition. In May, it was reported that he was continuing to review intelligence on the Russia investigation. That same month, he unilaterally subpoenaed intelligence agencies in an apparently fruitless effort to turn the Russia investigation into an Obama administration scandal. Then in August, he again, without warning Democrats on the committee, sent subpoenas to the Justice Department and to the FBI, looking for any documents that they had related to the Trump-Russia dossier, threatening those agencies if they didn't comply with his one-man subpoenas. As of tonight, we know the Justice Department still hasn't complied with that request from Devin Nunes. But now tonight, we learn that Devin Nunes once again is throwing out subpoenas on his own, personally. Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee are learning about these subpoenas by reading about them in news reports. Not only that, we can report exclusively tonight, according to a source familiar with the matter, that these subpoenas were issued just one day after the staffers on the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic staffers and Republican staffers, met with the legal counsel for Fusion GPS to discuss Fusion voluntarily cooperating with the committee's investigation. We're told that that meeting between Fusion and the committee staffers, that constructive meeting, was held on Tuesday last week. Then, despite that constructive meeting about cooperating, Devin Nunes sent out his subpoenas to Fusion the very next day, on Wednesday. That's despite what a Democratic source on the committee called a good faith engagement by the witnesses on potential terms for voluntary cooperation. These subpoenas also come after the Fusion GPS co-founder Glenn Simpson spent 10 hours voluntarily testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee this summer. Following tonight's reporting about these latest subpoenas from Devin Nunes, members of the House Intelligence Committee met for a previously scheduled meeting. I would be very interested to know how that went down, and I might have a way to tell you next. There's the Robert Mueller special counsel investigation into the Russian attack on our election and whether the Trump campaign colluded in it. Then there's the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation into that. Then there's the Senate Judiciary Committee investigation into that. Then there's the House Intelligence Committee investigation into that. But then on top of all of those things, there's another one. There is a member of the Trump transition team, a Republican Trump loyalist congressman who we all thought was recused from the real investigation. But he is now issuing his own subpoenas on this matter. We have confirmed tonight that Congressman Devin Nunes of California has subpoenaed Fusion GPS, the research organization that commissioned the Trump-Russia dossier from former British spy Christopher Steele. Devin Nunes has sent them his own subpoena. We're not sure why, but I'm also not sure how he can do that if he's just the one dude. Joining us now is Congressman Eric Swalwell, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman Swalwell, thank you very much for being here tonight. I appreciate your time.
Good evening, Rachel. Thanks for having me back.
Do you appreciate my confusion as to how Congressman Nunes, who I thought was recused from this matter, is himself issuing his own subpoenas in the name of your committee when he's supposedly stepped aside from your investigation?
Yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, he actually tried to subpoena Jeff Sessions. So it was a recused chairman subpoenaing a recused attorney general on the issue of Russia. So, you know, today when we met talking to some of my other colleagues, we're not surprised anymore. And actually, there's a pattern here that as we make progress, or the press makes progress on the story, that's when this nonsense shows itself. But it's the act that you would expect from Donald Trump's legal team, not from an independent investigation. But we're determined. We are, you know, continuing to make progress. And you know, I would just say, Rachel, if he had the interest in what was behind the dossier, not the progress or the process that led to the dossier, we could find out a lot more. Because there's a lot of people mentioned in the dossier who should be subpoenaed, like Donald Jr. or Michael Cohen or Jared Kushner or Carter Page. Those are the individuals who should be hauled in under subpoena.
You used the word nonsense here to talk about these actions by Chairman Nunes. I have to ask if it's safe for the targets of these subpoenas to ignore them. We know that the Justice Department subpoena that you mentioned there that he sent out was basically ignored by the Justice Department. We know that some of the other agencies and people who he has tried to subpoena do not appear to have responded to them. Are these binding documents? Should the targets of these subpoenas feel that they are legally required to respond?
They should, but it's a bad precedent that we're setting up. That they don't take the investigation seriously because they don't see a serious lead investigator in our chairman. And so, you know, that poses a real problem. I also should mention, Rachel, Roger Stone, after we interviewed him in a public press conference, told the public that he had refused to answer the key question about his involvement in the Russian hacking, which is who he was talking to with WikiLeaks and whether it was Julian Assange or not. And he said he wasn't there under subpoena. He was there voluntarily, and so he didn't have to answer that. So we are letting witnesses set their own terms, and we haven't shown a willingness to actually subpoena Roger Stone and ask him to give us that information. So we're going in the wrong direction, and we are at risk of having a flat earth report come out of the House Intelligence Committee as to what happened with Russia.
A flat earth report, those are striking terms. I know that you attended a House Intelligence Committee hearing or meeting this evening. Can I ask about how things are on the committee? If you're trying to sound the alarm here that the ultimate report from this investigation on your committee is something that we ought to worry about in terms of its integrity?
Yeah, well, we are all, you know, inspired by Ranking Member Adam Schiff, who is leading a serious investigation and who is dogged in leading us into finding out what happened. But, you know, it is frustrating that you see unity on the Senate side with Senators Burr and Warner, and then disunity on our side. And if we have a report on the Senate side with one set of findings and then a bizarro report out of the House Republican side, I think that helps the Russians, you know, perpetuate their narrative that this, you know, was just something that was made up. It's not true, and actually in that chaos, they will thrive and be able to come at us again.
Congressman Eric Swalwell of California, House Intelligence Committee. Thanks for helping us understand this. We're getting into some weird,
My pleasure.
Getting into some weird times with this story. Thanks for helping us make sense of it. All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Before we go tonight, I want to go back for a moment to a story that we talked about at the top of the show with Ronan Farrow, who reported for the New Yorker magazine a follow-up piece on what the New York Times broke last week about Hollywood mega producer Harvey Weinstein. This is a story that obviously has been breaking over the course of the last several days. The allegations that Ronan was able to report, both in terms of that New York Police Department sting, that audio that he was able to obtain, also in terms of the rape allegations that he reported out for that piece, make the story that started in the New York Times just that much more serious. I want to reiterate that we're going to have Jodi Kantor here, the lead reporter for the New York Times, reporting on this story here tomorrow night. We will have more on that issue, I expect, in terms of when this could be reported out versus when it was going to continue to be an open secret that people knew about but didn't discuss. I just want to say we're going to have more on that tomorrow. So thanks for being with us tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow. Now it's time for The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. You on the Weinstein Company during your hour issued a statement saying, this is from the remaining board members, a bunch of them have quit, but there's a group left, and they said these alleged actions and are antithetical to human decency. These allegations come as an utter surprise to the board. Any suggestion that the board had knowledge of this conduct is false. And boy, Rachel, the reporting in the New York Times and Ronan Farrow's extraordinary reporting indicate that the knowledge was very widespread in that company.
Well, and the fact that, you know, we now have to parse what was a joke, what was a rumor, what was witnessed, what was known about, what was covered up. I mean, that level of complicity and knowledge is quite a number line here in terms of how close other people were to this story and how breakable it was before it finally made its way into print. So this is a story that obviously is a story about Harvey Weinstein, but it's also a story about everybody who had contact with these allegations from when they started and why it took this long for it all to come out.
And there was a massive cover-up system built within the company, and aiding and abetting system built within the company, even bigger than the descriptions of what we roughly know about how things worked in Fox News.
And the thing that I find that makes me want to do additional reporting on this, and actually specifically makes me want to talk to the reporters who have now broken this story, is I'm looking forward tomorrow night talking to Jodi Kantor to hear about whether or not the Times also experienced during their reporting some of what Ronan described here in terms of the threats he said he got and that his sources got. These women coming forward even now, people from inside the company coming forward even now, getting incredible pressure, and him getting incredible pressure as a reporter to not do this. That means the system for shutting this stuff down has been operating as recently as this week. And so if the New Yorker and the Times had to fight that in their own way in order to get this stuff published, that means that this isn't stuff like, you know, I heard about this years ago and let it slide. That means that the cover-up is still active. And that's a different type of culpability in terms of people who are saying they had no idea.
And the New York Times knows how to work its way through these kinds of threats. And when you're a reporter for the Times, you have a massive protection system around you. There's a point in this process where Ronan Farrow is essentially a freelancer bringing this into the New Yorker, and he was under very serious threat. Thanks to him being on your show, I got a chance to shake his hand in the hallway and talk to him a bit on the way out of the building. And the threat that he was under, the legal threat, the Weinstein money will bury you in court threat, even if this never gets to court. Just the threat of suing someone is so financially frightening in a situation like that.
Yeah, and imagine being, you know, getting that threat as somebody who's bringing it to light, but then compound that by imagine being one of the women who is helping bringing this to light, who is in the industry and who is talking about something that happened to them personally, who already dealt with the physical threat of what she alleges happening to her, and then imagine those legal threats on top of that in terms of the kinds of pressure that these women are under for coming forward. I mean, I don't care how famous some of these actors are who are coming forward. The amount of pressure they had to endure, the amount of stress and the bravery that it takes for them to speak out, even now, even alongside all these other women making similar allegations, it's almost unfathomable. And I mean, the bravery of these women to come out right now, it's really something.
And this is in direct service to women who are entering this business right now this year. Think of the college graduates who have come out of their colleges this year, who have headed off to companies similar to the Weinstein Company and places like that in Hollywood, in New York, around here. They now have this document, and Ronan's reporting is so invaluable because it puts them in the room with a person like this as they read it, and they can identify with the choices that these women make in the room, and some of the heroic choices. Rosanna Arquette, for example, who basically smacks down Harvey Weinstein and gets out of that room. There's so much for the young women entering the workforce to study in Ronan's article especially. Yeah,
and you know, the Rosanna Arquette piece is also, you know, illustrative for the opposite reason. I mean, one of the things she's coming out about is saying, listen, yeah, I got away and I said no, and I smacked this down as best I could, and then my career, I paid for it forever after. And yeah, I paid a major price for it, and that's part of what it cost me to stand up and do it. I mean, for me, one of the heartbreaking things about this, particularly in the follow-up story in the Times today, is to read the stories of these women who were 22, 23, 24 and entering the industry and promising talents and wanted this. This was their dream, and this is what they were pursuing. That's why they got into the room with Harvey Weinstein in the first place. They thought it was an opportunity. And not only were they abused allegedly, or harassed allegedly, or attacked allegedly, the end result for them is that they got out of the industry.
Yes. Yep.
They left. They dropped that dream and did something else when they realized that this is what it took in order to get ahead in that particular part of American life and American culture. And that's on everybody who ever knew about it and tolerated it.
Well, I'll be watching tomorrow night as I was watching tonight, Rachel. Really extraordinary evening. Thank you, Rachel.
Appreciate it, my friend. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, for 2 whole days and nights, President Trump mysteriously held his fire against Republican Senator Bob Corker after a Twitter fight with Corker on Sunday morning, in which Senator Corker got the last word on Donald Trump with this tweet. It's a shame the White House has become an adult daycare center. Someone obviously missed their shift this morning, and Donald Trump did not fire back at Bob Corker. Someone in the White House must have been urging the president to do something he's never done, just put the phone down and walk away from a Twitter fight, and he did. For 2 whole days and nights, possibly the most difficult days and nights of the presidency for Donald Trump. Adult daycare center? Bob Corker says Donald Trump is in adult daycare, and Donald Trump says nothing until finally this morning, Donald Trump couldn't take it any longer. And with 2 days of agonizing over how to respond to adult daycare, Donald Trump came up with this. The failing New York Times set little Bob Corker up by recording his conversation, was made to sound a fool, and that's what I am dealing with. It was an historic tweet for Trump, not just because it took him 2 full days to come up with an attack tweet against someone who had hit him hard, but because, for reasons Trump scholars could not figure out today, the insult spelling of little has changed in the Trump language. Little Marco was always simply Little Marco. Little Marco Rubio, the lightweight no-show senator from Florida, is set to be the puppet of the special interest Koch brothers watch. Little, with 2 T's, Little Marco, is now, of course, a vote Donald Trump has been able to rely on in the Senate, even when it comes to taking away health care coverage for 20 million people. It might be that in what Bob Corker believes is the unstable mind of Donald Trump, the word little, as an insult, belongs to Senator Marco Rubio forever. Trump might need it again as soon as Senator Rubio stands in opposition to the president on something, on anything. And so changing the T's in little to D's might make a certain sense to Donald Trump. But no one has yet offered a credible theory about the apostrophe at the end of the word little. But there had to be a very, very good reason for changing the spelling of that word and putting an apostrophe at the end, because the President of the United States took 48 hours of presidential time to think about it. And there is no indication that the president was thinking about anything else during that time period. And of course, as with most Donald Trump tweets, the president had no idea what he was talking about. Recording Senator Corker's conversation with the New York Times was Senator Corker's idea and the New York Times idea. Here's Bob Corker telling the New York Times that he's having his staff record the conversation.
I know they're recording it, and I hope you are too.
Yeah, I am.
The Times released that audio after Donald Trump tweeted his lie about Bob Corker being tricked into being recorded in that conversation. Donald Trump did not tweet anything about what Senator Corker actually told the New York Times, including we could be heading toward World War III, thanks to Donald Trump. And I know for a fact that every single day at the White House, it's a situation of trying to contain him. And he concerns me. He would have to concern anyone who cares about our nation. And the president has us on the path to World War III. Donald Trump apparently believes that height really is the measure of a man. That is because Donald Trump is himself over 6 feet tall and a simpleton. The New York Times reported today, in labeling Mr. Corker little, the president was evidently returning to a theme he considered Mr. Corker for Secretary of State during the transition after last year's election, but was reported to have told associates that Mr. Corker at 5'7" was too short to be the nation's top diplomat. Well, our first Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, was 6 feet 2 inches tall, which nicely matched the height of his boss, George Washington, who was also 6'2". But Thomas Jefferson did not think that his height set a mandatory precedent for future Secretaries of State. When Jefferson's turn came to choose a Secretary of State, President Jefferson chose James Madison, who was 5 feet 4 inches tall, 3 inches shorter than Bob Corker. And of course, Donald Trump has no idea how tall James Madison was or anything else about James Madison other than he might be the guy who Madison Avenue is named after, which of course he is. Multiple reports indicate that President Trump was fuming about Bob Corker for days after the senator said this about Secretary of State Rex Tillerson.
I think Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, and Chief of Staff Kelly are those people that help separate our country from chaos.
Senator Corker said that right after Rex Tillerson was reported to have referred to the president as a moron in a meeting of senior administration staff at the Pentagon. The president talked about being called a moron in an interview published by Forbes today. The questioner said there are reports out today over the last couple of days about him calling you a moron privately. Has he reached out to you about that? Do you believe that? Do you believe that he said that? Trump said, well, we may have to if he did that, which he says he didn't, by the way. He said he didn't, and they announced with the State Department that he didn't. I think it's fake news, but if he did that, I guess we'll have to compare IQ tests, and I can tell you who's going to win. Of course, with any Trump answer that is 5 sentences long like that one, there is bound to be at least one lie. And of course, Rex Tillerson never said that he didn't call the president a moron. That's a very important part of this story. Rex Tillerson has had many opportunities to say that he did not call the president a moron. And it is true that the State Department spokesperson said that Rex Tillerson did not call the president a moron, but she was not in the room when Rex Tillerson reportedly called the president a moron. And no one who was in that room has gone public and insisted that Rex Tillerson did not called the president a moron, and perhaps more importantly, no one in Washington, no one in that room, no one in the Trump administration has bothered to even attempt to defend the president against the accusation that he is a moron. until today. It fell to President Trump himself to defend his intelligence against the accusation that he is a moron, and he did that with that Trumpian self-contradictory answer that he gave to the moron question. At first, the Trump position is, he says he didn't, by the way, he says he didn't. And then the president goes on to say, but if he did. That's how confident the president is that Rex Tillerson did not call him a moron. He's so confident that Rex Tillerson did not call him a moron that he immediately entertained the possibility that Rex Tillerson did call him a moron. And he entertains that possibility to the point that he comes up with a plan to prove that Rex Tillerson is wrong and that Donald Trump is not a moron. He says, if he did that, I guess we'll have to compare IQ tests. In his meeting with former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger today in the Oval Office, the president did not challenge Kissinger to an IQ test, not just because the world knows that the 94-year-old former Harvard professor and Secretary of State would beat Donald Trump in an IQ test in his sleep, but because presidents just don't challenge people to IQ contests. That's easy to forget during the Trump administration. And at least one compartment of Donald Trump's brain seems to know that, because look at what he said with Henry Kissinger sitting right beside him when he was asked about his boast that he has a higher IQ than Rex Tillerson.
Did you undercut the Secretary of State today with the IQ comment?
No, I didn't undercut anybody. I don't believe in undercutting people.
I don't believe in undercutting people, says the man whose true religion is undercutting people. The man who called the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee today, Little Bob Corker. That is what pathological lying looks like. I don't believe in undercutting people on the day when he publicly undercuts people. There is not a person in the world who does not know that Donald Trump is lying when he says, I do not believe in undercutting people. And Donald Trump knows that you know he's lying, but he cannot stop himself. You have never seen that before in a president. You've never seen a president who publicly proves he's telling a lie on the very same day he's telling that lie. And that is why Senator Corker believes this president does not have the stability or the competence, those were his words, stability or the competence to fulfill the duties of the presidency. And as a result, we are on the path to World War III.
Mr. President, is Senator Corker right that you're putting the U.S. on the path to World War III?
We were on the wrong path before. All you have to do is take a look. If you look over the last 25 years, through numerous administrations, we were on a path to a very big problem, a problem like this world has never seen. We're on the right path right now, believe me.
Believe me. In the same interview session where the president offered the lie, I don't believe in undercutting people. When he was asked if he was putting the United States on the path to World War III, he gave an answer that was a meaningless jumble of words without a hint of knowledge, wisdom, or reassurance, ending with the two words, believe me. The only people who can believe Donald Trump at this point are the people who believed him when he first started lying about President Obama's birth. And according to the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Corker, what's at stake now in the president's lying, thanks to the president, who publicly begs to be believed in one breath while telling provable lies in the next breath, is nothing less than World War III. Joining us now are Ron Klain, former Chief of Staff to Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Al Gore, and a former senior aide to President Obama. Also with us, David Frum, senior editor for The Atlantic. And David Frum, I want to go to you on this point of Bob Corker warning the world that this president is risking putting us on the path to World War III. The president is asked about it today, and the answer contains absolutely nothing that is even relevant to the question.
So you flipped us all out tonight, and I'm a little flipped out, but I would just point out that along with, we recently mourned the loss of Monty Hall, along with the door number 1, behind which is World War III, there is a door number 2, which presents another, according to Bob Corker, not quite as immediately terrifying, but still troubling alternative, which is Bob Corker said the thing that is saving us from World War III is that the senior officials of the Trump White House, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, the Chief of Staff, are not doing what the president says. They're repressing him and containing him, and that's our salvation. And obviously that's a palace coup like that is a better alternative than World War III, but it's not constitutional. It's not the way the American system of government is supposed to work. It's not supposed to be that the president makes decisions and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense say, don't think so. So we have the risk of war that you so powerfully depicted. We also have the ongoing reality of the government of the United States defying presidential authority to cope with him and setting in motion some anti-constitutional proceedings.
And Ron Klain, we have the Wall Street Journal, conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board coming out with an editorial saying, of course, Bob Corker is right. We have the Washington Post coming out with an editorial saying, of course, Bob Corker is right. And that leaves Washington with the question of what can we possibly do if this depends simply on the mood management of the President of the United States to avoid World War III?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with David. It's a very scary night tonight. And, you know, but this is the feud between Bob Corker and Donald Trump is just what every parent sees in the back seat of their minivan every day between two 10-year-olds when they're fighting over who's got in daycare and who's too short and who's not tall and all these things, other than the fact that one of those 10-year-olds is equipped with nuclear weapons. And this is not a new concern. I mean, you'll remember, Lawrence, that last year during the campaign, for the first time ever, men and women who operate nuclear silos signed a statement saying they were scared that Donald Trump would become the commander-in-chief and might order them to fire nuclear weapons. So this is a concern that we knew about during the campaign, that we're seeing bubble to the surface. And I agree with David, the antidote to that, which is a constitutional crisis, where senior civilian officials or military officials refuse to follow the president's orders. It looks like the good scenario at this point in time.
And they're not refusing. They're not refusing to follow. They're saying they're developing a lot of hearing troubles, they're trying to prevent it coming to the point where the president gives the order. And that is the thing that Bob Corker talked about. Anthony Scaramucci back in July complained about this. He said there are people inside the Trump White House who see it as their job to protect the United States from Donald Trump, and God bless them and thank them for their service. But it is not the constitutional way to run the government of the United States.
Let's listen to what Republican Charlie Dent said about this.
We've had a lot of these the emperor has no clothes moments, and I'm glad that Senator Corker has brought voice to this. We are concerned. My colleagues, my Republican colleagues in the House, I know, and Senate, are concerned by much of the dysfunction and disorder and chaos at the White House.
Ron Klain, there are real cracks in the wall now.
There are cracks, Lawrence, and I think the question is, will other people step up and say what Bob Corker said a version of what John McCain said when he voted against the health care bill, and be Republicans who speak out against this president. There are cracks, but they are only cracks. And I think the question is, will this come undone in time to save the rest of us from the rest of the Trump presidency? And I hope that other people of good conscience will follow Senator Corker's lead, will follow Congressman Dent's lead, and call this out and stand up to President Trump and point out what's really going on here, which is a horrible crisis of our Constitution and our presidency.
And David, Bob Corker has been very careful to not go out against Donald Trump and until he found the spot where he felt he simply must. He actually supported Donald Trump at many turns in the road here. He has been reported to be very friendly with President Trump prior to August, anyway, of this year. So he built his credibility among Republicans as someone who wasn't, for their taste in Washington anyway, just quickly or reflexively anti-Trump. It took him a while to get here, but now that he's here, we have never heard more condemning language from a United States senator about the President of the United States.
Look, Bob Corker's no hero of conscience, but I think as the story unfolds, what you'll hear is, I mean, there's a kind of sick, perverse dynamic, which is the people who really are heroes of conscience, well, they don't matter because they speak up early. The people who are somewhat less heroic, but a little bit more heroic than those who speak that you hear from them next. The tipping point is always the people who are the biggest opportunists. When you lose the opportunists, then you're really in trouble. And so what you will have are Republicans of ever worse character standing up later and later. And I think if that's what it takes to save us from the Monty Python alternatives of curtain number 1, World War III, curtain number 2, palace intrigue and palace coups, that's what it takes.
Line of the night, when you lose the opportunists. Beautifully put. Ron Klain, David Frum, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, the president versus the Iran deal. What will the president do? When will he do it? Ambassador Wendy Sherman will join us. She helped negotiate the Iran deal that the president is now threatening. Wendy Sherman says the president is playing with fire.
You're going to see very soon.
Thank you, sir. In tweets over the weekend, the president blamed Senator Bob Corker for the Iran deal. If you listen to the Trump White House, you would never know that Senator Corker voted against the Iran deal.
Senator Corker worked with Nancy Pelosi and the Obama administration to pave the way for that legislation and basically rolled out the red carpet for the Iran deal. I mean, those are pretty factual.
In an op-ed in the New York Times today, as the president moves toward decertifying the Iran deal, former Undersecretary of State Wendy Sherman, who participated in the negotiations on the Iran deal, said, the president and the Republican-controlled Congress are not only playing with fire, they are lighting it themselves. Joining us now, Ambassador Wendy Sherman, who's a NBC News and MSNBC Global Affairs contributor. Ambassador Sherman, tell us the essential points you're making in the New York Times today. What is their version of playing with fire?
Well, it's very interesting, Lawrence. What the president is going to do is say that he's not going to certify that Iran is complying with the deal, even though the International Atomic Energy Agency has certified 8 times that they have complied completely, and all of our partners in the negotiation, including our European partners, believe that Iran is complying with the deal. Then he's going to toss it to Congress and abdicate responsibility and say to the Congress, well, now you've got under the review legislation that the president was talking about, that Senator Corker helped design, you're going to have 60 days whether to snap back sanctions and blow up the entire nuclear deal. The president's going to say it's not in our vital national security interest, and they're not staying with the spirit of the deal. What he's really saying is that somehow or other, allowing Iran to go back to seeking nuclear weapons is in our vital national security interest, and that just seems absurd on its face. In addition, quite frankly, I think the thing that he's really upset with about Senator Corker is the review legislation, which was meant to hold an administration, I think probably thinking would be a Clinton administration's, feet to the fire. Every 90 days, the president has to say this deal is working. And the president of the United States today has said so many times it's a bad deal that having to do this every 90 days is driving him completely mad. And that's what he's really mad with Bob Corker about.
The president apparently had a phone call with the United Kingdom's Prime Minister, Theresa May, tonight. And this is the British readout of that phone call. The Prime Minister reaffirmed the UK's strong commitment to the deal alongside our European partners, saying it was vitally important for regional security. The Prime Minister stressed that it was important that the deal was carefully monitored and properly enforced.
I couldn't agree with her more. I would say, you know, the president is going to talk about all the actions that Iran is taking to destabilize the Middle East. And there's no question that Iran is really involved and engaged in malign behavior in the Middle East. But we have lots of tools to deal with that. We have sanctions on Iran for virtually every activity. The Congress just passed additional sanctions against Iran. We can work with our partners. We can preserve the security of Israel. We can attend to the concerns, the legitimate concerns of the Gulf countries. But we don't need to urge North Korea, it's all the same, melding together. We don't have to urge Iran to go back to seeking nuclear weapons to do that. That's just absurd.
Quickly before we go, do you have a sense of if this is thrown to Congress, that voting might be different? For example, senators have had some time to watch this deal in action, and some senators who were opposed to it in the past could be in favor of continuing it now.
Indeed. We've seen Senator Schumer and Senator Cardin, two Democrats who voted against it, say they think the deal should stay in place. We've seen the Republican chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, say he thinks the deal should stay in place. Jeff Flake has said now may not be the time to decertify this deal. So we've got plenty of people who understand that we are doing what we're supposed to do, which is stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon, which could project even more power into the region and deter us from the actions we need to take with our allies and our partners.
Ambassador Wendy Sherman, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up, the polls for President Trump get worse and worse and worse, and now he is losing the crucial swing states that won him the Electoral College, and that could all mean big wins for Democrats in the elections next year. And later, the games the Trump team is playing with Robert Mueller's investigation. %67%. That is the astronomical disapproval rating President Trump has in the latest AP poll. 67%. That's what the Trump chaos presidency has earned. And that was before Trump ally Steve Bannon promised even more chaos in the Republican Party.
Remember, I said, I'm going after the Republican establishment, and we're going to go after them. We're going to challenge. There's a coalition coming together. There's a coalition coming together that's going to challenge every Republican incumbent except for Ted Cruz.
There are very few political analysts who are even capable of tracking all House and Senate elections, and there might be only one who is consistently good at it. The analyst we all turn to for questions of what's going to happen in congressional elections is, of course, Charlie Cook, editor and publisher of the Cook Political Report. And now Charlie Cook believes that Donald Trump and the Republicans have made Democratic control of the House and Senate within reach in the next election. He writes, the party needs to sublimate its divisions, get mainstream Republicans to the polls, and persuade the Trump base to cast ballot for non-Trump Republicans. That's a tall order, and it's why last week's news reduced the odds of the GOP retaining its majority from a good bet to even money. Joining us now is Charlie Cook. Charlie, what about this week's news of Steve Bannon trying to bring chaos to the Republican re-election campaigns of all the senators running for re-election except Ted Cruz?
You know, this is all just so terribly self-destructive. I mean, it was as if they're trying to lose at least their majority in the House, if not the Senate. And, you know, I kind of wonder, what are these people thinking? I mean, you know, how much fun would it be for President Trump to hand over the power to subpoena to House Democrats? I mean, are they thinking about this? I'm just sort of baffled when I watch some of this behavior. And, you know, how in the world does Steve Bannon think the president's agenda would get through if Republicans lose 1, 2, or even the 3 Senate seats that would tip the Senate over? And that's entirely possible when they're, you know, it's like a cannibalization. I mean, going after Jeff Flake in Arizona and Dean Heller in Nevada, and now going after other people. Wow. I'm just standing back and watching in disbelief.
Have we ever seen a president come back in a year from a 67% disapproval rating? He's got less than a year, really, when you consider voting in the next congressional elections, to get that disapproval rating into some kind of manageable territory for his party.
Well, that 67 is a little higher disapproval than other polls, but like just take the last week's Gallup poll, for example. It was 38 approve and 56 disapprove. The average for presidents, newly elected presidents at this point, is 62% approve, and President Trump has a 38% approve. And you look at his numbers among Republicans, he got 88% of the Republican vote. He's got about 82% approval rate among Republicans. Okay, that's fine. But he got 46% of the independent vote. Now his approval rating, the Gallup, is 31% among independents and 9% among Democrats. This is not a recipe for being able to hold on to Congress. I mean, when you think of why do parties have disastrous midterm elections, and for the last 6 midterms, the party in the White House lost their majorities in either the House or the Senate or both. It's a president with low approval ratings. It's a divided, their party being badly divided, or it's having a Congress that hadn't delivered much. Well, those are it's check, check, check for all 3 of those boxes this time. So this is looking, I mean, look, we got 13 months, but gosh, this is what it looks like when the wheels start coming off a bus.
You published some stunning numbers about this since analyzing midterms since 1966, showing that if the president's approval number is under 50%, that means that his party will lose an average of 40 seats in the House and lose an average of 5 Senate seats. If the president's approval is under 50, you didn't even publish a number, Charlie, for what happens if it's under 40.
Yeah, well, this is new territory here, but yeah, and now the thing is, there are some factors that would partially mitigate it. Congressional district boundaries since the 2011 redistricting benefit Republicans some, and natural population patterns where Democratic vote is concentrated in urban areas. But let's just say, take that 40 number. Okay, knock it down by 25% to 30. That's still losing the House. I mean, anything 24 or over is losing a majority in the House. So even with the district boundaries and population patterns, the chances of Republicans losing 24 or more are going up. And but you're right. I mean, when a president has an approval rating of 50 or over, they've typically either picked up seats or just lost a dozen or 15 seats. But when it's under 50, it starts getting really awful, and 38, good gosh.
The race is on. Charlie Cook, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Coming up, some Trump advisors are telling the president to attack the special prosecutor. Other Trump advisors are telling him to charm the special prosecutor. What is a president to do? Tonight, the Associated Press is reporting that President Trump is being advised to go on the attack against Russia Investigation Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. The AP reports that longtime friends and allies are pushing Trump to fight back, citing concerns that his lawyers are naive to the existential threat facing the president. Trump supporters and associates inside and outside the White House see the conciliatory path as risky to the maverick president's tenure. Instead, they want the street-fighting tweeter to criticize Mueller with abandon. Because, that always works with special prosecutors. President Trump spoke to Forbes magazine about the Russia investigation in a new interview. He says the Senate Intelligence Committee has found, quote, that there has been absolutely no collusion. They just said that yesterday, 2 days ago. Senate, there has been no collusion. Would have been really big news if that happened, right? It didn't. Here's what the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee actually said.
The issue of collusion is still open, that we continue to investigate both intelligence and witnesses, and that we're not in a position where we will come to any type of temporary finding on that until we've completed the process.
And there are some new developments in the House investigation. Congressman Devin Nunes, the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, who recused himself from the Russia investigation, has suddenly subpoenaed the partners of Fusion GPS, the firm that produced the Trump-Russia dossier. those subpoenas were issued without consulting any of the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee. Coming up, with the issue of collusion still open, as Chairman Burr just said, what could the special prosecutor's next move be, and how will Donald Trump and his lawyers deal with the special prosecutor?
We're going in the wrong direction, and we are at risk of having a flat earth report come out of the House Intelligence Committee. If we have a report on the Senate side with one set of findings and then a bizarro report out of the House Republican side, I think that helps the Russians, perpetuate their narrative that this, was just something that was made up.
Joining us now, Barbara McQuaid, former federal prosecutor and professor of law at the University of Michigan. She's now an NBC News and MSNBC legal contributor. And Professor McQuaid, we just heard Eric Swalwell indicate that there are problems with the House Intelligence Committee investigation, with the recused chairman suddenly issuing subpoenas without consulting the Democrats. Senate Intelligence Committee seems to be working much more smoothly. But then, quietly, no one taking the temperature of it on a daily basis, is the special prosecutor, who's unaffected by all of this.
Yeah, I'm sure Robert Mueller, this is his M.O. Quietly go about your business, keep your head down. No media is good media, just do your work. And so I think the fact that things are quiet is just the way Robert Mueller likes it. I have no doubt that he is keeping that team of 16 lawyers very busy around the clock, chasing down every lead and getting their arms around this investigation.
And what do you make of these reports this week? First, there was a report indicating that the Trump legal team has decided to go on the charm offensive with the special prosecutor, and then you have these advisors outside of the team telling the president, no, you got to be in an angry Twitter war with the special prosecutor. It seems to me that neither one of these approaches will make any difference with real federal prosecutors.
Yeah, I think whenever you're a high-profile public figure like President Trump, you have to really fight the battle on two fronts. There is the legal battle, of course, and then there's also, the battle that's being fought in the court of public opinion, and you have to kind of figure out how you want to play that. But with respect to the legal battle, I agree with you. I don't think any of this is going to matter to Robert Mueller. He's going to get what he wants to get one way or another. If you can make witnesses available voluntarily, you can provide requested documents voluntarily, or you can fight Robert Mueller and require him to use subpoenas and litigate them in court. But ultimately, he's going to get what he wants, and it really will only dictate the pace of the investigation. And I think it's in the best interest of the American people to speed things along. And certainly, if you're Donald Trump and you believe that you've done nothing wrong and you want that exoneration that he's been asking for, he too should want things to move quickly. And so cooperation would be the best strategy to get there.
We have a report in Politico tonight saying that Trump campaign advisor Carter Page has said he will not testify to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Now, this is someone who is available to just about every TV talk show who would invite him on, and he became kind of a stranger and stranger witness for himself on television. Do you think he might be getting legal advice that now is the time to start being quiet?
Well, it could be, if Robert Mueller, for example, wants to use him as a witness, and if he wants to cut a deal with Robert Mueller, for example, in exchange for leniency, he would testify against others who have committed more egregious misconduct than he has, then he doesn't want to do anything that might blow that deal by talking to others. So that could be one potential reason that he doesn't want to be talking with other committees or even the media.
Former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Tonight's Last Word is next.